Hello again. It really is the biggest joy to be back at MCC Boston tonight. Even through all of the snow and the weather, I'm so happy to be back. It's maybe the coldest weather my Florida bones can take, but I'll keep you updated on that. And even though the city might be slowing down to hunker in and bundle up and stay warm, the past weeks of 2019 have been pretty busy. We're knee-deep and heels dug into a government shutdown that's left a lot of us feeling powerless in the hands of those who are supposed to be leading us. And yet, there are the people that are doing the good work are still doing the good work. Just this past week, there was a legislative advocacy day where agencies and folks from all over the state met with our representatives at the State House to lobby for better, more inclusive sexual health. Brave souls still marched and showed up for each other in the face of continued injustice. Just yesterday, out on the Common, I work in homeless services in the city of Boston, and 4 individuals experiencing chronic homelessness were housed this week, and 13 more are set to sign their leases next week. And tomorrow we celebrate and honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy of justice, of activism, and a deep, abiding faith that our hands and our feet can build God's kingdom in this life. So there is hope here. And with the new year especially, there is new hope. There is a place for refreshment, for beginning again. And even though our Christian calendar begins in Advent, and we as Christians get a sneak peek, a head start, an advanced preview of what is to come, that does not make us immune to the culture of New Year's resolutions, the new year, new me, this cycle that starts strong on the first of the year and is probably waning right about now. Before we get too far down this path, though, I do want to congratulate those who are standing firm, who are making good decisions for their bodies and their lives, and use the new year as a kickstart into something new. I don't think New Year's resolutions are in and of themselves a bad thing, but I think sometimes we get ourselves into a sticky situation when the word belovedness is taken out of God's mouth and is instead echoed back to us hollowly from magazines, Facebook comments, or Whole30 recipe books. So, church, this is not a sermon about failure. It's not a message about not measuring up, because that's what we get told day in and day out by people that don't even know our names. Today's sermon comes from the prophet Isaiah. It comes from a writer more interested in seeking justice, in seeking goodness, seeking healing and redemption and restoration, telling us all the ways that God is making us new. Because in our calendar, our high holy days and the high holy season might be over, but that does not mean that God is still not doing a new thing. And in this season of continued newness and freshness, this series that your congregation is working through, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to have a testimony. I've always thought that to have a testimony, you just have to hang on for the good parts of your story to come, when the blessings fill you up so much that there's nothing left to do but overflow with joy for what God has done in your life. For that finish line when what you've been working hard for so long finally comes true. And you get your new name, the old one's so far gone we don't even remember who that person is anymore. This is what it feels like when we read from Isaiah today. We see the celebration, the vindication, the part of the story where Israel is made whole and holy in God's sight. And for those of you kind of into Bible stuff, or for those of you who are wondering why this passage is really heavy-handed with the marriage imagery, for our Old Testament writers, the marriage bond was one of the best metaphorical tools they had to describe the relationship between God and Israel. And we can talk more about where that gets a little problematic on another day. But for our purposes today, we know that when Isaiah talks about Israel as the beautiful wedded bride, we know he's writing the part of the story where everything is okay. He's writing about the ending. But this is where I get stuck. When I testify to God's goodness in my life, I need to remember where it is that I first started, because we all started somewhere. Maybe you started somewhere where the people around you told you you can do anything or be anybody, told you that you were somebody. Or maybe you started under harsher conditions where you had to lock beautiful parts of yourself away for safekeeping. Or maybe you started in a place so different from where you are today that to think back on it now is more difficult than you could ever imagine. But we all started from somewhere. Our stories all had a beginning. And as followers of Jesus, the beginning of our story is where we say today something has changed. It's the part of the story that always gets the least amount of credit. Our tendency is to focus on the triumph, only on the part of the story where people make it out. We don't want to hear about the anxiety of uncertainty, the fear of unworthiness, or being insecure at the start. We don't always talk about the famous artist's 18-year-old decision to disappoint her parents and go to art school. We focus on the AA leader's 10 years of sobriety and gloss over that at one point he made a decision to do something different. We want to hear that everything is going to be all right. And I am not in the business of proclaiming that there is not an abundance of hope in these parts, but what I am here to say is that God has given us a testimony, and if you can't see where you've been, you can't preach where God is taking you. And I want to talk now about what it means to begin again, to be called by a new name. That point that sets us on a journey that says, I'm not who I want to be, but I know God is making me new. That says, I know I've been changed and that the world out there is gonna be changed. So I'm not gonna do the things that make me feel ugly or broken or unwhole or unholy anymore. Because I know I'm made in God's holy and beautiful image. Beginning again is the feeling of waking up and recognizing that you are beloved. Beginning again is not like starting fresh, waking up with a whole new life with your bills paid, your debt set to zero, college loans are forgotten. Beginning again is taking your own self, the self that's been through the fire and seen the pain and the trial and all the hurt the world has to offer, and saying, today I'm going to start when I only thought there were endings. Beginning again, starting fresh, being refreshed in this new year, recognizes that God has not abandoned you, and so you cannot abandon you. You can't abandon your story, you can't abandon your scars, you can't abandon the life that God has gifted you with. Beginning again is not about starting over, it's simply about starting. It's about saying yes to God, yes to you, saying yes to the world again. It's the acknowledgement that if God is making all things new, then I am new, and I get to be new. And there is a name that the world doesn't know how to call me, which means this moment is a beginning. This day can be a beginning, and we get to pick up what we've learned in the past and carry it with us to where God is bringing us in the future. We are a part of God's story, and this story is always being written. And to begin again is to invest in the ending, is to remember that the whole of the story, from start to finish, God looks at you and sees a finished product, fully beloved. We know this because before Jesus did any of the things we know Jesus Christ to have done, before calling the disciples, before the miracles, before the death and resurrection, before people even knew Jesus' name, God spoke at the waters of baptism with the words, "You are my beloved child, with whom I am well pleased." Even for Jesus, there is no thing you can do to earn your name as God's beloved child, because you always are and always will be. And so today, in Paul's 1 Corinthians text, this list of spiritual gifts is not being read as a prescriptive list that makes one person worthy of praise or worthy of God's love or their place in the church, but as a reminder that to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. That we all do the work, But without having or doing anything first, God calls your name beloved and says that you are good, that you are full of the Spirit that works and breathes for good. I am not afraid to preach on belovedness in a world that continues to tell you you are not. The world will and does tell you who it thinks you are, but your name is a name of wholeness and healing and truth. God says, here is your chance to begin again. Here is your name. You are a beloved child of God, and you get to begin in this space again. This is the word of the prophet Isaiah. God is still about to do a new thing. God is not done with you, so you cannot be done with you. And the prophet says it like this: all kings shall see your glory, and you shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord shall give. Tells you to spit out whatever does not belong in your mouth, even your own name, if that is not what allows you to live into the fullest expression of the beginning of what God has in store for you. Andrea Gibson, a spoken word poet, says, your name is not a song you sing under your breath. Your name stands in the face of all endings, of all the stories the world tries to tell you about who you are. Because Isaiah says, you shall be a crown of beauty in the hands of the Lord. This name, this identity in God's hands is the good news this morning. It's not morning. I'm very used to preaching in the morning. It is here that I would be remiss if I didn't speak to or testify to the courage of our trans and non-binary siblings who, like looking again to Andrea Gibson, says, looked at all their options and chose conviction, because the story of your life, God isn't waiting for the good parts. God rejoices with you in all parts because you have a testimony to tell. You have a name to live into. And maybe this testimony is not yet about triumph, but maybe it is that you know your God is a God of beginnings, and you are a beloved child, and there is nothing that can take that away. And the beginning is precisely that. In the beginning, God created, and it was good. And we are created in the image of goodness, the Spirit of God making all things new. And so we begin again with a testimony to the name of belovedness that God gives us anew every morning. That God is doing a new thing for you and within you that is more than the sum of all of your thoughts, that you will never be enough. This day is a beginning, this day, and you are the beloved thing that the Lord has made. I look to poetry so often while preaching because there's no doubt in my mind that as much as our prophets are poets are also prophets, speaking truth to what looks like unflinching and unending power. And for those of you who are connected to the world of poetry, you might already know that this week we lost Mary Oliver, someone who truly asks us to experience both the primal joy and primal melancholy of being alive. What Mary Oliver asks us throughout her entire body of work is our attention. Attention to the smallest details, to an abiding communion with nature, the blades of grass, the way your dog follows you when it thinks you're lonely, the flowers that mark the border between the end of one thing and the beginning of something else, and to the places where the borders between things become a little more permeable. She says that our full and focused attention on the tiniest thing is as good as a prayer, and that to pay attention is our endless and proper work. And so with that sort of attention and thinking of the name that God has given you and continues to give you every day, I want to end with a poem. It's called Reckless Poem by Mary Oliver. She writes, "Today, again, I am hardly myself. It happens over and over, it is heaven sent. It flows through me like the blue wave. Green leaves, you may believe this or not, have once or twice burst from the tips of my fingers. Somewhere, in the deep woods, in the reckless seizure of spring. Though of course I also know that other song, the sweet passion of oneness. Just yesterday I watched an ant crossing a path. Through the tumbled pine needles she toiled, and I thought, she will never have another life but this one. And I thought, if she lives her life with all her strength, is she not wonderful and wise? And I continued this up the miraculous pyramid of everything until I came to myself. You are yourself. You are called by a new name, and your name is nothing less than what you already are. You are beloved. You are kind. You are good. You are beautiful. You are here and present in this life, this holy wildlife. Creator God, thank you for the life you have gifted us with. Thank you for the chance to look to the ant, to look to poetry, to look to each other and see what is beautiful and good, to see you working in this world. Thank you for calling us by name, no less than who we are every day.